Hey, everybody, welcome back to HR Heretics. So, Nick, you are the CEO of Hunt Club. Can you tell us what Hunt Club is and what was the founding insight?
Yeah. And Nolan and Kelli, thanks for having me. I
Yeah,
love listening to everything you produce, so I appreciate it.
awesome.
So founded the business in really actually it was funny. It was started in 2014 and it was built out of a incubator that I was running or a venture studio called Nucos Ventures. And the insight in creating the business and really we got really going in 16, 17, but the insight was really predicated on I had a good friend that was a partner at a large executive search firm and he kept winning a bunch of digital oriented searches. So think of doing a SVP of performance marketing or chief digital or product officer. And the funny thing was he was a really focused in consumer products and sort of traditional brand marketing. So he didn't actually understand how digital played that big of a lens in general in marketing. And so basically he would call me up and say, "Hey Nick, I just won this, SVP of performance marketing search. What is performance marketing?" And that was kind of how it started. And I knew nothing about the recruiting industry. I certainly was investing in companies and starting companies and adding people to the team, but I didn't quite understand how external search worked. And so he would come by the office, late afternoons and barter with a six pack of beer or something. And we'd sit there for an hour and I'd walk him through, okay, here's what performance marketing does. And here's how you spend money on Facebook ads. And here's how they think about sort of quantitatively driving impact and generally show them a couple buckets of personas that would be a good fit. And we get to the end of the conversation and be like, "Oh, I saw you're connected to those people. Can you introduce me?" And I did that for 5 different searches over basically a 4-month period. And I actually placed 5 people for him. And so that was the start of the business.
5 of 5, Nick. It's incredible.
Yeah. Well, there are some misses in there too. So I would actually
Okay.
5 to 7 intros per search, and
Okay.
one would hit. So
Okay, so explain to the audience how Hunt Club actually works then, right? Because I understand it is a network-based executive search firm, but get us under the hood and explain what exactly that means and how it actually works with the dynamics.
yeah, of course. So piggybacking off that story, what we believe in Hunt Club and how it actually works is we think of it ourselves as Search Firm 2.0. What that means is we built all our own technology to power our end-to-end process internally to try and create a more transparent and efficient experience. So things like if you were to use a traditional search firm and you hire them for a search, it might take them 2 to 4 weeks to put together a long list of candidates that they want to pursue and market. That's something that we can do in minutes with AI. Things like outreach, whereas they really have associates generally doing outreach on their behalf to drum up conversations and schedule meetings to just qualify if someone's interested. We build automation and quite a few tools to do that. And so it's really taking all these parts that are quite administrative and or human oriented and building efficiencies for it. And then the other part that we do that I think is our big differentiator is we use a network of thousands of leaders to help you find your next great hire. So what that means is if we're doing the VP of marketing search for Dollar Shave Club, we have hundreds of CMOs across the country who sign up, drop their LinkedIn, their Gmail, their contact networks into our own platform. We see who they know. We build technology to map the strength of their relationships. So we can really crowdsource referrals from people that have been there and done that. And so the whole vision of our business is we really want to integrate subject matter experts, leaders, people that really understand an industry and or have a great network of high quality talent that they can help our clients find awesome, opportunities, or at least awesome people in their network for those opportunities. And then we pair that with a full service search consultant. So you still work with a great talent partner, a recruiter. You'll work closely to help define what the role is. You'll work closely with them to scope and get into market and qualify candidates, all the way to setting up a hiring process, negotiating, closing. But we can tag these amazing experts along either the entire journey or just in the referral process to help you really get it right. And we think, given the complexity of how hard it is to get the right person and how skill sets are changing, the only way to fully find the total addressable candidate pool is through all these different networks of people that really know the market quite well. And so that's the business. The simple form is we think about recruiting with trust, and there's no better way to find your next game changer than an introduction from someone that has lived and breathed the role and knows someone that would be great for it.
Yeah. I love that. I mean, you're crowdsourcing the search, essentially, which is cool. I mean, I get calls every week. Hey, who do you know? Who do you know? Who do you know? And you've been around for 8 years. I've never heard of you.
Well, we're doing a bad job on my end in expert acquisition. So, Kelly, after this call, I'm going to call you or send you an email. You got to become an expert and be part of the community.
I mean, I might also be under a rock. I mean, it could be that too. But like, why am I not on? It's incredible.
You're not. Like we actually took a very well. I don't know if you're under a rock, maybe not, but like we've taken like a really kind of more methodical approach. I mean, we've grown fast as a venture-backed business, but we really curated every single expert one by one. Many of them come as like finalists or silver medalists as part of our search process, and we think that builds a super authentic relationship. And if you pattern match like the manual behavior, what happens in this industry, a partner will call, which you well know, but like a partner will call his candidate pool or her candidate pool and say, hey, I've got the search, who do you know? And we're building the same mechanism as that, just digitally. So most of our experts actually come as former candidates in a search.
Yeah. So if I'm an agency, are you my friend or my enemy? Like, do you help me or do you take my clients?
Well, probably, hopefully take your clients. No, I'm kidding. Look, I think the market's massive, right?
Because I could see both. I could see how both would be true. I'm just curious, like,
Right now, we're focused on being sort of our own vertically integrated solution across the board. So use our own technology, only use our referral network to provide value to our clients and provide service to our clients. I mean, I think there's a future in a world where we offer some of that to a wide variety of other customers. And we already have a software business that we're selling to venture, growth equity, and private equity to power their own networks in unique ways. But right now, we don't have any sort of plans in the immediate future to offer our technology and network to other search firms.
Yeah. So Nick, one of my founding insights with Continuum was executive search is really expensive. It's really slow, and there's very little technology involved. And when I first started building the business, my initial take was like, why are humans a part of this thing like at all? And that ended up being wrong, because I have found that companies, especially CEOs that are running exec level searches, want a person to work with them. They want a throat to choke, like they want a partner as part of the search. Talk to me a little bit about like what you have learned as part of this journey and how it's been a little bit different than what you initially thought.
Yeah. Well, I think like it's a really good insight, Nolan. So like one of the reasons we started this version of the business versus more of a marketplace connecting to people without sort of any human in the loop is that what we always believed is to really match make credibly on both sides, you need a qualified person really guiding and shepherding both sides. And so I actually don't think there's a world, especially in like professional search to executive search, where you can really long-term disintermediate the consultant or the recruiter. I think you can empower them in a ton of different ways. And I think it's for like really simple reasons. Like hiring in today's world is complex. Maybe a consultant helping you evaluate and structure what skill sets you need can be a huge value add to the process. Or how about like really credible talent and candidates are quite busy. Like someone building a white glove process for them and getting them engaged in a process and working closely with them to decide if it's the right fit or not, like actually helps materially like bring a transaction forward. Or executives who are so busy, and this may be a priority, but there's 1,000 other things, as you both have sat in your seats, that you need to do beyond building your own team to keep a business running, that it's hard. So I think like the gravity of everything that a person or executive or a hiring manager does is heavy, and no one can really just ever really explicitly focus on this one thing. And then I also think, really to do it right, someone shepherding that process and making sure biases and or moments in time are not as much a part of the qualification, as well as like really getting to the important factors that might make a great partnership. So I think I'm with you. I think technology can make people more productive. I think network effects can create unfair advantages for accessing awesome talent. But I really believe that especially in the senior part of the market and even in the middle, sort of mid-senior part of the market, there's always going to have to be a human component to this.
Mm-hmm. And you take candidates all the way through the end, correct, Nick? Offer, accept, the whole thing. Okay, so you're seeing trends, data, insights across what I would think would be multiple industries and multiple functions.
Yeah, we work across a wide variety from consumer tech to consumer products and goods to healthcare to retail healthcare to health tech to SaaS, all across the board. So the team's about 60, 70 people on the search side. The business is about 130 people. So we're fortunate to kind of see a pretty high velocity of different things.
Great. So Kelly and I have had a debate, and I think I'm going to take an L on this one, but like, help us settle this debate. So so there's this notion of executives pre-negotiating severance, which essentially means as part of the offer agreement, the exec and the CEO of the company get to an arrangement on what the severance will be if they get fired. How often is this coming up?
So I'd say on CXO searches, so chief anything, north of 95% of the time. The only area where I don't see it sometimes is kind of seed, pre-seed, where perhaps an exec is actually more of a manager and or sort of director leveling in their phase of the career. But for call it like post Series B companies for CXO, 95% of the time. For SVP/VP, maybe it's 30 to 40% of the time, a little bit less.
Are you seeing differences by industry? Like I'm most familiar with SaaS, right? Enterprise SaaS. Is that true? I'm assuming it is for different industries as well, or is it a bit different?
I think. And so our lens is very much private equity, venture growth equity, and then some sort of public co, but it's a smaller balance of our customer portfolio. We're seeing it pretty much across the board. And I think also, especially given the last like 2 or 3 years and some of the volatility of the private capital community and some of these businesses, right? That I think executives are getting more in tune and in protecting sort of the potential for a transition, just given the volume of reductions or change management, or just like as simple as, okay, you did a great job your first year, but the business requires a totally different skill set for year 2 and 3, right? So we're seeing it at a pretty high velocity.
Wow. Okay. So Kelly, you were right.
Well, yeah, I mean, you know what I mean? Like, I love to see everything at all angles, and Nolan was coming at it as like, you're just protecting yourself if you're shitty getting fired. And I was like,
well, it feels like a red flag. Yeah, my take is it's a red flag.
Right. And then what Nick was saying, which I was saying, is actually when that doesn't happen and something happens is out of their control, that kind of comes up very quickly. And technically it's written like that, right, Nick? I mean, technically it's written if you are let go without cause, which I know in the end is blah, blah, blah. It's hard to, Nolan's like, they're getting it anyway. I'm like, yes, they are. But technically it's in the offer letter that it's protected only if, without cause.
Yeah. If you're, which means you're fired, right? Like you get fired. And so Nick, the thing I want to understand is, now that you're saying 95% or more of CXO searches have some sort of pre-negotiated severance, what do the terms typically look like? I can imagine a world to where they're very bespoke, but I can also imagine, given that you guys are seeing these all the time, that you could say, well, actually, this is more market for a role like this. So what are the terms that you typically see?
Yeah. So I'll give you a couple different lenses. So call it like pre-Series B, Series B to growth stage company, and then larger sort of public co. So pre-seed, it could be 1 to 2 months. Below Series B, it could be 1 to 2 months, and 90% of the time, it's something just super clean that says if this person's let go for anything but cause, they get whatever X part of their severance agreement. And so that's more the simpler version. From Series B plus, it could be anywhere for call it like 2 to 4 months, generally is sort of range. And then beyond that, all sorts of unique things around accelerated vesting and 6 to 12 months and all sorts of bells and whistles.
Wow.
For the larger scale executive. Yeah. And so I would say that the most frequent terms that one might negotiate are size of severance from a month's perspective, acceleration of vesting. So in the event that, you're 6 months into your second year, you finish the final year and or finish a percentage of your package if it's not for cause. So that happens occasionally. And I think those are probably like the 2 most negotiated terms. Sometimes there are things like waive of non-compete, waive of non-solicit in the event that something like that happens, but it's way less frequent than the other 2.
Hey everyone, we'll be right back in a moment after a word from our sponsors. Your workforce is both your organization's greatest strength and largest single cost. With Planful, it's easy to unlock the secrets of successful workforce planning so you and your HR team can make the right business decisions. Imagine using data-driven insights to develop accurate forecasts, close hiring gaps, and adjust talent acquisition plans collaboratively based on costs today and into the future. Planful lets you collaborate with colleagues in finance to understand the value your employees bring to the table. And the best part, you can get started with Planful in just weeks with minimal help from IT. Plus, with Planful, you get an endless runway. Planful grows with you, no matter how fast or large your team scales. Ready to transform your HR strategy? Join over 1,500 organizations worldwide who trust Planful as their go-to workforce planning software at planful.com/heretics.
Here's a crazy stat. Between hybrid and frontline employees, about 80% don't typically work in an office. So it's no surprise that digitally engaging employees is the number one concern for CEOs as companies go hybrid. But as hybrid is quickly becoming the norm, it's easy for workplaces to start feeling a little less human. Yet delighting a digital workforce is possible, and it can even be, dare we say, fun. That's where Workvivo, Zoom's employee experience platform, comes in. If you've ever recoiled at the thought of a static intranet that looks like something you built in 1995 using MS Paint, have no fear. Workvivo is a dynamic, intuitive, accessible, and mobile-first tool. People actually like using it, which is why companies like Ryanair, Dollar General, Virgin, and more have rolled it out to hundreds of thousands of employees. Workvivo's activity feeds, spaces, shoutouts, and live streams, among other features, help elevate the employee experience like never before. The result? Dramatically better retention, productivity, and most importantly, connectedness. A greater sense of the belonging we all crave at work, whether we sit at a desk or drive a truck. Make Workvivo the digital heart of your organization and achieve limitless human connection. Head to workvivo.com to book a demo and make sure you tell them that Nolan and Kelli from HR Heretics sent you. The other question I have on kind of bespoke executive offer letters is single and double trigger acceleration.
Yeah.
So how often does that come up?
So in venture-backed companies, I think it's pretty boilerplate for an executive to get double trigger. For private equity, we see single trigger for certain types of roles pretty frequently. But I think the truth is, like, as you work with some more and more seasoned executive that's been through like multiple transactions, they kind of realize that it's nice to have that term for protection. But whatever happens as a deal or an M&A deal is actually getting negotiation, those terms have a pretty high probability of being restructured. Usually in like some egregiously favorable way for the executive or in some form or fashion, right? But like if they're buying a business, more times than not, they want to maintain or retain some of the leadership team. And so the terms get generally retraded based on the point of acquisition. And so I'd say like double trigger is pretty par for the course, single trigger, less common unless a company is moderately distressed and or it's more of a private equity shaped deal. And those are the things we generally see.
Yeah, that's something that I didn't realize early on in my career. Nolan and Nick is like, that's great for your offer letter here. But as you're negotiating a deal, like all that ink gets wet like very fast.
You know what the least under negotiated term that I find is incredibly late exercise. So
I was going to ask that next.
Yeah, I actually think as an executive, like the 90, frankly, just as a teammate, like I get both sides of the equation, why a 90-day shot clock is whether or not a teammate should exercise their options is a good thing for the business to make sure they're having the right option pool to deploy to growing the company. Like 90 days isn't a whole lot of time. And like coming up with the cash in the event the business is moderately successful, that could be like a really stressful thing. But from the executive side, like I actually think like most should try and at least go in for at least 6 to 12 months late exercise, or even push it to upon liquidity event if they can, right? Because then you're not cash out of pocket. You can sort of take a percentage of your earnings and deploy it towards.
We've had many passionate conversations about this.
Yeah.
Yes.
And we're very much aligned with you that
very
like, the
much
90
aligned.
days is fucked up. And it's just the default because it's been the default.
Yeah.
That's
especially, right. And maybe like you tier it. So if someone's been there for over 2 years or 3 years, they get like a year cliff. If someone's sub 2 years, maybe it's 90 days or 180 days. I think there's some ways that you can mechanize it, but to honor people that have helped you build your business. But yeah, I'm with you. Like, I think I was talking to somebody today that had to go take out a line of credit from their personal bank to go pay for their options. Right. And like, they're paying 7% interest now on that line of credit. It might be a year and a half to 3 years before liquidity happens, given the markets. And it's a really hard thing to ask someone who's helped build a business to do.
100%. I knew someone that went down to the bank and took a $3 million loan.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh
And
my God.
and there's 1,000 ways that goes sideways, right? Like,
totally. So we love equity on this show, Nick, and we continue to be surprised, ourselves included, at like the level that we need to improve our knowledge around equity. Everyone does, and we've gotten a lot of comments. Thank you, because it's surprising that even executives, they miss stuff with equity all the fucking time. So I'd love to hear, like, what are you seeing? Like, what like what's your range that you're seeing with executives and their like knowledge, their sophistication around equity, and what are some surprises that they're just like, let me help you with this. How do you not know this?
I think the only the only function that's not going to be surprising that really understands it incredibly well is a 2 to 3 time post outcome CFO. Like, like that is kind of the only person I've ever seen. Like, okay, strike price, okay, I get it. Whatever I have to pay for my options, I get it. Late exercise coupled with like early exercise to shave off AMT taxes. Like, there's like, it's so complex. I don't understand why it can't be simpler. But very few actually truly get it. And, I think it's not meant to be simple, right? Like, I don't know why we haven't thought about a less complex construct for this, but things like, okay, what was the preferred preference stack on the cap table? How much capital has been raised? What's my 409A? What are the theoretical quantum of multiples the business can be valued at? And then making like a relatively educated decision. Okay, the business has raised $20 million. It's doing $1 million in revenue. It's growing 20% year over year, 10% year over year. It's going to run out of cash in 2 years. Like, I should probably not exercise because there's $20 million on the preference stack ahead of me. And then inversely, right? Like, people that walk away from, there's this one person that we know that we worked with to find an opportunity. And I worked really hard to coach him to exercise his options because he had such a biased lens of what was happening in the company based on his own experience. And I think that's also like a thing people always fall into the trap of. It's like, you were there for 2 years, you had a bad experience on the way out, you don't want to be a shareholder. And then like a year later, the business exited for $500 million and he would have made $4 million and he didn't exercise his options because of his own impact on the way out.
Yeah. Emotional decision. Yeah.
So I think there's a lot of work we can do as a community to really educate. And I think the challenge though is like, it does actually take like investment of time and talking to accountants and talking to a wide range of people. And I would actually like at a certain point like to see the community shift the instrument that we use versus having to really sort of educate. Because I do, I think I've raised a bit of venture for our business. I've been investing for 12 years. There's a lot I don't understand. And like, I think we just make it easier for everybody.
Totally. If I had to highlight one that I wish I would have gotten smart on 14 years ago when I started in venture, it was this preferred common dynamic and what that means, because you don't really fucking think about it. Like, you see your shares on the offer letter and that's all you think about, right? You forget about
liquidation preferences. And like,
that's the thing attached to that is liquidation preferences. In addition to that is the main thing.
Yeah. And no one, and I think like founders and companies and some of our clients are in a little bit of a rock and a hard place, right? How do you, if you're trying to preserve shareholder value and have a chance to build a business that creates some liquidity for everyone involved, including your teammates, if you were to communicate to them that we're all underwater on our RSUs or options, and for us to actually achieve a hurdle where we create value for ourselves, you have to get to X revenue growth, and the probability of that is 10%. Like, what do you think would happen to your employee base, right? So it's really hard. I think the best companies I know of are being super honest and direct and deliberate, and then doing a lot of really creative things like management carve-outs. We get the entire management team or the employee team gets, X amount of $1 million for every threshold that we exit the business, irrespective of our equity, right? In our position, or other sort of bonus incentives that at least help to offset it. And I think that's going to be a really helpful construct for the state of tech and what it is today, given how lopsided things are.
That's a really interesting solve to having companies that are overvalued today.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like PE does it all the time, right? It's they don't actually give you a percentage of the business; they just give you a cash slug based on outcome horizons. And I think we as like tech should think about that, right? Because maybe you're like, okay, the business is valued at $1 billion, and I think there's a 10% chance of us achieving growth over that. But if we have any liquidity event above 500 million or 300 million, everyone in the team gets X based on whatever their ownership right is, and like just incentivizing in a different way. That's a great idea.
I guess like, so you'd made the point earlier around like single and double trigger getting renegotiated during M&A events. I'm assuming that these could also get renegotiated during an M&A event. So it's a good idea, but like, let's actually see what the buyer says.
Hey everyone, we'll be right back in a moment after a word from our sponsors. Real talk, most talent leaders haven't yet cracked how to leverage AI for meaningful impact on their hiring processes and business goals. But the leaders who are effectively using AI to transform their recruiting team's efficiency and quality use Metaview. Metaview is the AI assistant for the interview process. Their AI records and transcribes hiring conversations, like intakes, interviews, and debriefs, then provides perfectly summarized notes of everything that was discussed. That means your people can focus on creating human connections with candidates during calls and save time on the busy work of cleaning up notes after every interview. But it's so much more than just a time saver, because perfect notes means perfect data. For every candidate and every pipeline, hiring teams can make confident, informed decisions, and talent leaders can finally take control of the interview process. Join forward-thinking talent leaders at high-performing organizations like Brex, HelloFresh, and Quora, and check out Metaview. Head over to metaview.ai/heretics to talk to one of Metaview's product experts, or get started for free. You'll be up running and AI-enabled in minutes.
This episode is brought to you by Warp. If you're a founder with employees in multiple states, you know managing state tax compliance is complicated. Warp not only automates state tax compliance, but also offers a user-friendly experience tailored to the needs of startups with a robust in-house team of experts. Warp ensures your startup remains compliant across all 50 states, giving you the peace of mind you need to focus on scaling your business. They also make it easy for startups to provide health benefits for employees, hire international contractors, and even claim R&D tax credits. Hundreds of startups trust Warp to handle their payroll and compliance needs. You can go from zero to payroll live in just 2 days. Don't let payroll and compliance hold your startup back. Visit joinwarp.com/peel or tap the link in the description. Get started and receive a $1,000 gift card when you run your very first payroll. That's joinwarp.com/peel.
Yeah, well, I also think like it's in these instances it would come out of the investor basis pool, not necessarily the acquirer, right? If the acquirer says your business raised 100 million and we're buying you for 20 million or 10 million, there's probably not a lot you can do. If the business raises 100 million and someone will acquire for 100 million, there's probably a way that all shareholders can work together to incentivize a transaction.
That I have not heard, Kelly. I haven't heard that at all. And I think that that's a tremendous idea for companies that are in this weird position of we've raised a shit ton of money and we are now overvalued, but we have a real business. We have a real business, and it's very hard for us to recruit given this inflated valuation. Nick, I haven't heard that before. Kelly, have you heard that?
I haven't, and I might, I'm going to go out on a limb here because we're all safe space, and Nick can tell me if I'm wrong, but living in venture the past 14 years, especially the past 2 years, I feel like the PE side has a bit more flexibility and flex around cash and to do that, right? On our side, and I'm seeing it everywhere. It's like survival, it's cash, it's trying to extend runway, not have to raise, it's trying to get cash flow positive. I mean, the money bags are like gripped very tight. And I feel like the PE backed firms have some more cash to play with that. So that's my hypothesis.
I think you're right in just sort of the flexibility of the structure. But I think, look, at the end of the day, if a transaction is forced by venture investors to get acquired by a company, that company will still need likely the participation of key employees, executive teams, those building the product to go along for a certain period of time. And I think that's a leverage point that a VC, a venture investor, could change the construct. And I actually think too, Kelly, like it actually happens more than you might think, where venture-backed companies get some sort of management or employee carve-out to go incentivize a transaction. It's just not widely spoke about by anybody because I don't think the venture community wants to arm the founding and or management community with more tools in their toolkit. But it's also something that if a company is employing a pretty good attorney, they'll think about a different construct to make sure at least some sort of outcome is great.
And thank you, Nick, for arming the community now.
Yeah,
that information.
I agree. I'm thinking about it as a recruiting strategy. Like, because many companies are in this boat of we are real, but we're just overvalued. And there's not much, you've taken the valuation. There's not really much you can do about that today. And so I think it's a way that you could actually still recruit, high-powered executives and get, assuage their fears of like, well, what's my liquidity actually going to be? I'm joining an early stage company because I want a multiple on these options. And I'm thinking about it as like, man, maybe we get a 1x here.
Yeah. And I think the way that we generally position it for our customers is like you sort of spell out like the almost IRR or return or annual comp in an annual basis, right? So like if you did like a $3 to $4 million management carve out for a key executive upon liquidity, not upon exit above certain thresholds, then you can kind of talk to them like, look, like if you're here for 3 or 4 years and we hit like this base case scenario, which is the board approved plan, you still would make your base plus whatever carve out over X period of time. And I actually think in a lot of ways it makes it more real too, right? So because you just have to exit the company versus hit a threshold.
I love that. Okay, let's talk about good interview processes and maybe also bad interview processes. So what do you see as like, the best run exec interview processes? Like what are these companies doing that other companies are not?
The best are really, really sharpening their pencil up front for days, weeks, sometimes even a month on scorecard, cross-functional executive alignment, archetypes to pursue and the pros and cons of those archetypes. And then like really creating a thoughtful and bespoke search strategy based on the sharpening of that. And then there's obviously a wide variety of other things you can do once you actually engage in the process we can go through. But I actually find the number one way that any company can create leverage is to actually invest in that upfront process and rotate it over a couple different times to make sure you have clear alignment and a clear thesis on what you want to go to market with or go find in market. And when someone does that, I think you just have a way higher probability for success, right? Because you're looking at 2 or 3 different shapes of a candidate that could be a good fit versus just I need this specific unicorn. You have a scorecard that aligns the strengths and weaknesses of each archetype, and you've gotten your entire executive team and or team aligned with that this is going to be the process and this is what we believe in and here's the pros and cons. So that's I think the thing that I'd love to see happen more often. Like anytime we kick off a search for a client, there's usually 3 pieces of work product, archetypes, a scorecard, and sample candidates per each archetype. And we think it's important to kind of put all of that on paper and then circulate it around their exec team to make sure people are really kind of aligned on what we're doing.
How do you feel about the notion of a working session, Nick? A presentation, a working session, kind of a mock staff meeting type discussion?
Love it.
Love it.
I love it. Yeah, I think because when you're in the room asking questions, sparring with each other, pointing things out, I think you can pretty quickly understand someone's working style, understand do they take or give energy when you're interacting with them, and all these things that are so complex to actually figure out in an interview process, a traditional screen and assess, move on process. So I'm a huge proponent of it. And like going back to some of the stuff that we talked about, Nolan, like also like this sort of fractional model, like work together before you start working together, and a wide variety of other sort of project-based work, I think is an awesome way to just de-risk the thing for everybody. And it's not just the company, it's someone signing up to be here for 2 to 4 years of their life.
Is that common though? Is that working session optional? Is it required? Does it depend?
We don't see it nearly as much as we would like. We see way more routine, sort of executive meetings, traditional interview process, sometimes some social outings, like we're dinner with a team, things like that, which we of course always encourage. But I would love to see more companies, really kind of have structured working sessions where they, as a team, invite somebody in to actually help be a participant on a problem or issue and understand how they integrate.
It continues to surprise me that it's not a more common practice, especially given what is on the line when you're hiring an exec, because you're typically not just hiring them, they're bringing in their leadership team, they're hiring a bunch of people, they're changing your culture. And so what do the detracting companies have to say about work trials and advising before full-time employment? Like what is their argument?
Why isn't it happening? We don't have time, or we
Yeah, why isn't this happening more? It feels like so obvious.
Yeah, I think it's a lot of work to structure that. And you both have said on leadership teams, right? Like how many of your leadership meetings were actually like super high quality interactions? It's a lot of work. And hopefully for both of you, like they're all great, right? Like, but I think even like,
see, it seems like less work than a dinner. I'm going to throw that out there.
yeah, but a dinner is like social. It's easy. You just book a reservation and make people get there. Like to actually create an hour meeting in that structure where you're inviting a candidate to partake and have them be a part of the discussion and have them engage in a topic that they have enough information on, but they won't have so much is actually hard. And so I think it's just the work of doing it up front and really speccing it and understanding the knowledge base of the candidate, and then creating a framework that actually is, appropriate for them to be pulled in a way where they can show their best selves, but also recognize that they don't have all the answers yet because they don't work there.
Yep. Talk to me about executive feedback. So I have a lot of friends who, especially in the last 2 years, have been really frustrated by the interview process with companies. Their take is, hey, I've been interviewing with all these companies. I get no feedback when I interact with the company. So what's your take on giving execs feedback as part of the interview process?
During the process or after the process?
I think both. Both is definitely what I'm interested in.
I am a huge proponent of it. I think transparency, honest transparency about where there are concerns, and then having a direct dialogue about those concerns on both sides every step of the way, I think makes for a wonderful partnership. And I think too often companies mask those concerns or share it amongst the leadership team, but they don't actually share it back to the candidate, and candidates have their concerns and they don't share it with the company. And then like one breaks up without really truly saying what they felt or meant. And I think like when you think about most of the times when things don't work out in a process, maybe 80% of the time it's the right instinct, right? Like somebody A, B, or C didn't show well, they don't have explicit experience, or there's a concern around this. But I think there's 20% of the time where you might have a really special candidate if you were headfirst in addressing whatever the concern was, and then hearing an honest, authentic take as to why or why not that is an issue, and vice versa on the candidate. Like there's only been out of our clients, so we've probably done a couple thousand searches now. There's only probably been a handful where our clients have like actually gone the depth and the distance with each other to really have a heavily informed opinion about who the person is and what the business is, right? And I know that's crazy, right? But like, especially in 2021 and 22, if talent is incredibly hard to find, people are switching, but every single candidate will have 3 to 5 offers, you kind of are forced to play at a different speed and absorb some risks. And so I love the world to shift to just more transparent view. And like, hey, I love this business. I love the idea of this business. I hate your growth rate. I have questions about your VP of marketing. I have concerns about product market fit. And I don't love the valuation. Let's talk about those things, right?
In a way that's digestible, for sure. I told this story in a webinar this week, but we had at DoorDash, we had a bias against hiring ex-consultants. And there was this guy who had 7 years of experience at Deloitte, and we got all the way through the process, and everybody had this concern because we had a couple not work out. And I remember picking up the phone and calling him and being like, and I'll use his name, Ajay, like, hey, this is the main concern, man. Like, we really like you, but we haven't seen this translate well. And just by putting that on the table, he then went on the offensive to sell me about why he was different and why he was going to be successful. And he knew coming in that this was going to be the bias against him. We're all humans. Like, we do have bias as much as we try to remove it. And he went on to be a VP. like he went on to absolutely kill it in the company. And I think part of the reason why is because we were very clear with him at the outset. I wish there was more candidness and transparency in the interview process, because look, at the end of the day, we're all trying to be performative. And then you get in and you're working with somebody and it's like you're spending more time with these people than you are with your family. Like, let's try and get this right, please.
Yeah, I'm on both sides, right? We actually had a candidate get an offer recently, and we coach the candidate to really go deep on one or two different things with our client. And they went deep for a 2 or 3 hour session, and they told our client, I really want this job, but I'm not the right fit for it. Like, and I think like people need to reframe. And look, I was going to say this, but then I think it's the other side of this. Like I was going to say, people need to reframe their perspective on taking a job versus like really getting it right in a way where like it's mutually fulfilling, you're driving impact and value. But I think the other challenge of this, right, is like people have mortgages and people have, 529Bs and child payments and all these things and paying rent and pressure and feeding their families. Like, so there's always going to be that level of fishing in the marketplace, right? Because company needs and human needs will not always balance perfectly, and candidates and talent won't always have the luxury to find perfect versus what supports their lifestyle, their family, and whatever member, right? So
I totally agree with that. And something we've talked about a lot, Nick, is like when you hire an exec, it's a 50-50 chance it works or not. Are you, given the thousands of searches you've seen, do you agree with that?
I think it's probably pretty close to that ratio. I think you're going to do things to move the needle by 10 to 20% up to 60 to 70. And we try our best to influence that. But I think humans are people. Like we had this amazing candidate that signed, crushed it out the gates the first 90 days, had a really unfortunate family death, was a totally different human being the rest of their tenure there, and didn't succeed in the role because they weren't able to focus on it. And look, that's like a really straightforward example, but I also think like people are human and humans change and their perspective changes constantly. And I think you can get absolutely everything right on paper and culture, but a moment in time can change somebody materially in a huge way. And I think that's the thing we all deal with as talent leaders is that's the imperfection that will always be there.
Yep.
Totally. Talk to us about back channels. So we've had this conversation a few times as well. I think back channels are generally positive. I think it's how you run them where people really fuck up. But what's your take? How often do you see it? Where does it go right? Where does it go wrong?
Yeah, so I think going back to the first part of our conversation, if you build a really transparent process where you're isolating the things that you actually want to back channel directly to the candidate, and then maybe even asking them directly to share people that can sort of refute that or give you an honest perspective on it, I think you can remove actually back channels from the process and really work authentically with the candidate. The inverse of that is like it takes a pretty mature both sides of the marketplace to do that well, and it's really complex to do that. So I do think there's a place for a informal reference as long as there's a really deliberate thing that you're looking for and a very deliberate point of view that you're trying to assess, right? And I think too often it's is this person good or not? It's like, were they good in your company, your culture, the size of business, the stage, the business model? What was impacting them in their life that year? Like it's so the depth and the rigor of the questions and the framing that a consultant should take should be so pinpointed that you're really specifically trying to understand the landscape and understand a very specific thing, right? And I think that's where everybody screws it up. Everybody. Like we've had informal references as we've hired people for Hunt Club that were incredibly negative, but we still hired some of these people because the negative thing was actually a positive for what they might do in our business, right? And so it's
like within the context of what, and then time is the other factor, right? It's like my brother is still 5 years old to me, and he's not. He's 44 years old, and you like have people, and they stick in your mind as they were years before. And to Nolan's point, this bias, it's just never ending.
Yeah, it's a really interesting point, Nick, because like basically today I think most people think about it as this checklist. And they're going through like, okay, like I'm going to ask the candidate for references, like check that box. Now I'm going to go do back channels, like check that box. And the more interesting thing is diving into that. and saying, what exactly are you looking for? Like, what is the thing that you need to get signal on that is an open question in your mind that is going to swing you from like, I like this person to I love this person and they're perfect for us, or like our culture or how we work. And I had one last week for a former direct report, and I'm talking to the CEO, and 15 minutes of the conversation ends, and he's like, anything else you think I should know? And I was like, yeah, actually a lot. Like, I don't know anything about your company. I don't know anything about your culture and how you guys work.
Yeah.
I answered your questions, but I don't think you know anything about this person based off of the conversation we just had.
Yeah. And I think like the right, if you were to frame the right informal reference or back channel, it should probably be like 15 to 20 minutes of context setting and then 5 minutes of questions about the individual, right? And I think like that gives at least somebody the frame of reference to make a qualified decision on their experience that's maybe relevant or not. Look, unless it's like you're trying to spot check something that happened that is a really quick yes or no, then I think there's sometimes could be a different, but I think 97-8% of back channels should run that way.
It's also the framing on it too, right? Like it used to be, hey, should I hire this person? Are they good or not? And they'd be like, yes, they're good because they want to help them, versus, hey, we've already decided to hire this person. Like we're going to give them an offer. They're going to come work with us. So no need to like, blow smoke. Tell me how I can help them, right? How I can
love that.
best, how I can help them. And now they're not protecting. They're like, oh, you've asked Nolan to go live with you. His bathroom's messy, right? They're like, it's less heavy. And that's been very effective.
Kelly, I love that. The other thing I like to do with candidates is to be very clear with them that we are going to back channel as part of the assessment piece of the process, and say like, look, we're going to do this because it gives a signal that we otherwise wouldn't get. Is there anyone we shouldn't reach out to? And then give them the opportunity to pull the ripcord on it and be like, hey, don't touch this person for XYZ reason. And then you can start asking questions there of like, if there are any red flags that show up. But that way you're putting things on the table and you're establishing trust in the relationship, versus what back channels are happening today is they're removing trust really quickly because you're not talking to the person about it. And they're like, wait, what the hell? You called my old CEO and like didn't tell me about it? That's weird.
Right. And you can test their honesty, right? It's like, hey, I'm going to reach out to like all these people. What am I going to hear? Like good, bad, and the ugly. What is that? And then are they self-reflective? Are they honest about what they might hear? And they can explain why with their own context around why you might hear that. And now you get situation context on top of the honesty.
I think candidates should do that too. No, I feel like candidates should back channel people that have left the company, right? What was it like? Like, what was the culture? How was growth? I think that it's funny. I feel like if companies run some sort of referencing process 90% of the time, candidates maybe only run it 5 to 10% of the time. And I think we need to improve upon that as an ecosystem too.
And if you do it as a candidate, you got to also play by the same rules, because the company could have been different. Like that context has to play both ways versus, oh, it was terrible 5 years ago, I'm not going.
So well said, both of you. Okay, Nick, last question is I want to talk about the future of exec search. It feels like we're on the precipice of really big change. And, what I've been hearing from companies is like, hey, I'm not using exec search as much. I'm going through my own individual networks. I feel like this cost and the ROI, like they just don't match up anymore. It also feels like search firms have been resistant to using technology, and now we have AI coming in a really, really big way. So just what's your take on the future of executive search and where's it going?
Yeah, I think like the trends last couple of years, are obviously rooted in a lot of different ways. It's one of the more complex environments for interest rates and macro fears, and obviously a pullback in venture and growth equity. So I do think you'll see quite a bit of resurgence as interest rates contract and companies start to grow in sort of a more meaningful way and capital frees up. But I think as far as the future of executive search, look, I think probably 2 or 3 things. One, if companies aren't using technology and like actually figuring out what their AI strategy is, and not just like put it in their quarterly earnings call, we're a tech company now and we've started this digital component of our business, but like truly innovating and then building the space and the freedom to innovate, I don't know if they're going to be around in a few years. So they're going to have to pivot their business model to more leadership advisory. And when you think about like what's happening in the largest part of the market, you're seeing this diversification of almost every major firm go from, we used to do search 30, 40 years ago, to now we do quite a bit of leadership advisory, quite a bit of search, quite a bit of other things, whether it's acquiring staffing firms or acquiring fractional consulting firms or fractional talent firms, right? So people are really diversifying out of it. And most of those business models actually don't have a ton of digital as well. They're just really more diverse portfolio. And I think the primary reason for that is they recognize they don't have the cultures to actually innovate. Every single search firm, for the most part, at any sort of scale, mostly operates as its own sort of fiefdom of a partner, an associate, an engagement manager, and maybe an AA, running in their own practice line, focusing on their own billing, and caring about the culture of the firm in some way, but really caring about their own P&L. And so if you have, let's just say you're a 400 to 500 person firm with 200 partners, 200, 300 partners, those 200, 300 partners maybe care about the growth of the firm, but they certainly care about their own billings. And so I think that's going to present a huge challenge for every single firm out there. And so from technology not being used and partners who are quite good at they do not having incentive to use it, to firms not really working as a team sport because passing relationships to each other could be bad for their own bottom line, to the introduction of AI in a lot of different ways, I think the most disruption we've ever seen in the industry is coming over the next 20 years. And I also think like the biggest thing that I think is understated is if you were to poll, basically anybody working in a tech-ish company and ask them who any of the Shrek firms are, the probability of them knowing their names and what they do, if they haven't gotten past Series C or D, is probably some 20%. It's like, oh, I know Korn Ferry because I watch golf, right? Or I've heard of so-and-so. And no knocking against Korn Ferry, but the next generation of executives is not going to use a firm with two names on a door. And so I think if they don't start to innovate, if they don't refresh their talent pool, if they don't start solving problems that are interesting to their consulting base, and figure out ways to do search better as a team versus sort of pockets of mercenary groups, I just don't believe that they're going to be nearly around in the same way in 20 years. I think they're going to be there. Leadership advisory, portfolio of different services and offering. I just have a hard time believing they'll be able to compete in search.
Well said.
Yeah, well said. Nick, thank you so much for the time. This was excellent.
Thanks, Nick.
HR Heretics is a podcast from Turpentine, the network behind Econ 102, Moment of Zen, and Turpentine VC. Subscribe, 5 stars, share it on Apple, YouTube, Spotify, anywhere you get your podcasts, all the things.